So I'm just going to quickly explain the substats versus damage gain percent chart, because I didn't really go into the math of it. It's pretty simple, but thought I may as well show you what I did in this completely disorganized sheet. Even though there's a lot of numbers here, it's really not that bad at all. So this middle chart is the most important part. This is representing the x-axis and the number of substats. So it starts at 0, goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way down. So each one is a max roll substat. So for example, crit value, this goes from 100% to 107.8%. And so this is representative of roughly when a character has a crit rate ascension, because you start off with the 24.2% attack, which is close enough to 25%, and you start off with 50% crit damage. So you have 98.4 crit value in the beginning, not 100, but it's close enough. It helps make this calculation simple. And so the consolidated formula for crit multiplier is crit value squared divided by 8 plus 1, and that just assumes that it's a 1-to-2 ratio for that calculation. So for crit value here, it's basically equivalent to 25% crit rate, 50% crit damage. So a quarter of the time you deal 1.5 times damage. So a quarter of 50% is 12.5%. So crit multiplier is 1.125. And so that just goes down the list. And then how it works is in the chart, you see these numbers. You don't see a decimal, you see a percentage. And that's because it's comparing the damage gain you get from the current value divided by the previous value. So you'll see you get the current value minus the previous value divided by the current value, and that's how you get the percentage change. And as you can see, it goes up until about here, where it peaks at 2.72% for 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th crit roll. And so in terms of crit value, this is at around 300%. So that would be equivalent to 75% crit rate and 150 crit damage. And so this doesn't mean that you shouldn't stop getting crit rolls at this point, because out of all the percentage gains, it's usually the highest, especially because there's basically no way to buff your crit outside of characters like Farazan, C6 Farazan, C6 Sarah, C6 Goro, and if we ever get other characters that boost crit damage or crit rate or whatever. Whereas compared to damage bonus and attack percent, there's a lot of different ways to get it outside of artifacts, where you have Bennett as a huge one, Noblesse, and in terms of damage bonus, you got stuff like Emblem, you got stuff like weapons, that a lot of weapons give damage bonus as a passive. Interesting that it's most valuable when you get around 75 to 150, which is a cool thing, but it's still good up until you get to 400%, where the formula changes to just 1 minus the crit value, because at this point you'll only want to get more crit damage, because going over 100 crit rate is pointless. And so that's when this starts to fall off, because you're over 400 crit value, so you're at 100 crit rate and 200 plus crit damage. And so now we can move on to the next stat, which is in this chart is attack percent, but it can also be stuff like scaling percent, for example. So I decided to not graph out every single character's scaling percent, because I'm lazy. I don't feel like adding more lines to this, because I feel like the graph already closely enough represents what you need to know about artifact farming, which is that you just want to get as many subsets as possible, basically, because of how much easier it is to roll a good artifact when you have more valuable substats in it. So I did graph HP percent for Hu Tao, and this assumes that, I forget if it's talent level 9 or not, but essentially what this 927 means is that this is her effective base attack after you account for the conversion factor for HP to attack. So 5.9%, 5.96% max HP, right? So Hu Tao's base HP is 15552 times 0.0596, right? It's just about 927. So that's Hu Tao's effective base attack at talent level 9, which is pretty cool. And so that's important because attack percent multiplies off of base attack. It doesn't care about anything else. So once you have the base attack, that's multiplied by the attack percent factor, and then you add up your flat attack external buff. So for Hu Tao's case, that's going to be the feather, and then she has her normal base attack. And so what this looks like in the sheet, if I just quickly make the line present, boop, it is less than attack percent without Bennett, as you can see. Key idea is that HP percent good because there's not really a way to externally buff HP percent on her. And then Hu Tao also gets some extra HP already. Why don't we just take a look at this? So 4780, actually I haven't taken a look at this myself. So 4780 from base HP on the flower times 0.0596, 284. So it's actually less than the amount of flat attack you get from the feather, which is interesting. Actually, I may as well add that now. So what is it, like, it was 284, I think? Or 285? Okay, yeah, 285. So I'll just pull this down, and we'll get a more accurate picture. Boop. What? Cause that. And Google Sheets is so great. There we go. So this orange line here, right? It's even lower now after we accounted for the flat HP on the flower. So, a lot of this crit is basically always going to be better than HP percent, but this is any source of HP percent substats. So if we go up to 8, which is an HP percent sans, right, still 2.1%, roughly 33% worse than crit, which is not that bad because if you get 2 of them, that's going to be about 1.5 times as good as crit. So yeah, HP percent good on Hu Tao. It's going to be a similar case for defense scalers, except instead of you'll get slightly better results because you don't have that flat defense artifact stat. So it'll be somewhere in between HP and attack for non-scalers. So similar line, but anyway, I'll just hide that for now that that's explained. And so now we can move on to, I guess standard crit can be next. Simple enough, it's very similar to the crit rate ascension thing that I showed you. So here, because characters start off with 5% crit instead of 25, you gotta account for that here in a different formula. So here I just accounted that for all of the crit rolls should go into crit rate for the biggest increase, because if you increase crit damage instead, that's going to be worse. So you gotta increase crit rate until you get to the 1:2 ratio, and then you can use the assuming perfect ratio formula. Otherwise, this assumes that if we use crit value squared divided by +1 formula for anything other than under 100%, then you're going to be assuming that you have 15 crit rate and 30 crit damage. That's not possible. And so what that results in is, because you're not increasing crit rate and crit damage at the same time, you're going to see some slight dips in how much damage you gain until later on. And what this implies for, especially for lower investment or early game accounts, is that it's pretty bad to spec into crit, especially because your base attack is a lot lower. And so relative to that, flat stats actually provide bigger increases compared to percentage stats, which is kind of interesting. It's like the only time where you want flat stats over percentage stats, and not just as flat stats as a side thing. That's like, okay, it's better than nothing compared to an early game where it's more so, oh yes, I really want this. And so next, let's compare it to when you have a bunch of flat attack that you get added from Bennett. And from this line, you can see it's even lower than Hu Tao's HP percent scaling, because basically all you end up doing with adding extra flat attack is pushing this line further along. Like I showed in the video example, the reason why I didn't show a separate line is because, well, it's actually the same line. So if we go to like about 2.4%, right, it's going to follow basically the exact same trend as this line. So you just take this over, grab this line, place it over like somewhere here, and then the lines will basically match up perfectly. And again, it's the same formula for all of these. You just increment each stat one by one. You calculate the new attack stat with whatever base attack you choose. So in this case, I chose 844 base attack with no Bennett, and also the same thing for Bennett. So yeah, 5.83%, that's the max value for attack percent, and HP percent. It's not the same for defense percent, because defense percent has to make up for not having a flat flat defense main stat artifact. The last thing I want to go over is for EM stuff. So here's the max value for EM. This is the formula for the EM multiplier for Vaporize and Melt, which I explained in my other video. And so this again compares the new value with the old value to see the relative increase. Transformative is all transformative reactions, so that's overload, hyperbloom, swirl, that stuff. Compared to everything else, you can see just how much more this scales, especially in the beginning for EM. And then by the end, it's like, oh no, 1%. That's way lower than everything else. Each EM has a slightly different formula, so this is 16 times EM divided by EM plus 2000, 2.78 times EM divided by EM plus 1400. And then aggregate and spread is 5 times EM divided by EM plus 1200. I didn't include it in the graph because it's so much higher than everything else and it kind of messes with the perspective. You can even see that even aggregate and spread is going off the chart a little bit because it's all the way above 8% at first. Whereas even damage bonus, the best scaling stat. Yeah, so here's damage bonus. It starts off at a higher number because instead of you needing to account for stuff like the feather and base attack, you just go off of this, the raw, 100% to 105.83%, because the damage bonus main stat is the same as an attack percent main stat, so it technically scales the same amount of substats as something like attack. And especially since you can't have damage bonus as a substat, it becomes a really, it can be a very valuable stat to buff. Oh yeah, and then one last thing about the chart that I made a little note in the video but didn't really explain, just because I didn't want to spend too much time on the graph. It's that, so the line for Vaporize and Melt, I'll just make that a little bit more clear here. So it's this red line. I'll just quickly hide the attack percent Bennett. So this red line here, this assumes that every single hit is vaporized or melted, which for a lot of characters isn't going to be true. In the video, I looked at a case for Xiangling to try to keep things simple and not really overwhelm anyone with too many different charts to keep track of, because it's really not that necessary. Basically, you just take the percentage and multiply it by the amount of damage that's being melted or vaporized. So to be clear, this is different from the number of hits. This is the amount of damage contribution. So for example, Yoimiya, I think Yoimiya is a good example of this if you're using her in a vaporized team. All right, so first hit you get 59.9% vaporized, 149.5% vaporized, 170% vaporized. This is just a multiplier for all of these values together, so it doesn't make a difference what talent level this is. It'll always be, as long as you're doing the same combo, it will always be the first part of the first hit, the third hit, and the fifth hit. And so if you just tally all of this up, you'll see that even though she does 7 hits and gets 3 vaporizes, it's not going to be 3 out of 7% multiplier for the damage. It's going to be, I don't know, closer to 50%, I'd say. Just as an estimate, maybe more than 50%, closer to 60%, but... And then, same thing for aggravate and spread. The amount of damage that you actually gain from aggravate or spread will depend on the number of aggravate and spreads you get. So this is just the multiplier for the raw damage of aggravate and spread, so you also have to multiply this percentage with just the raw amount of damage, percentage damage you're gaining from aggravate and spread, which just means, like, say if you're calculating a spread team on Alhaitham, then you're going to need to figure out how much raw damage he's doing, how much spread damage that he's getting, how much contribution that spread does to his overall damage, and then from there you'll be able to see this is how much damage he'll gain from spread. But Alhaitham isn't the best example for this because he also has secondary EM scaling as a passive, which I also didn't go through in the video because that's just another thing to think about and it's just messy. So each point of EM gives him damage bonus. You kind of have to make a separate graph just for his EM scaling, which just becomes a whole other mess. So yeah, that's just the more in-depth explanation on substats versus damage chart. Hope you enjoyed. Hopefully you learned a little bit or enjoyed this quick little breakdown of stuff that I didn't really include in the video. Bye bye, have a good day.